Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Level Set. We're here on the last Saturday in March of 2024. And we have a fascinating topic this morning. And we're not going to tarry. We're going to get right into it. We're going to talk this morning about the Missouri Color Convention of 1870. And this was a convention that coalesced around the betterment of Black folks. And what was so unique about it is that it had no caste. It was a collective um, venture to lift the entire race, unlike some of the things that we're seeing today. But we're not going to belabor the point. We're going to pass the ball to Dr. Alexander to give us a synopsis on this, and we dive into this conversation this morning. And Dr. Alexander, let's talk a little bit about that January 1870 convention in Jefferson City, Missouri.
In Jefferson City, Missouri. So again, certainly we probably could have had this conversation in January, as that convention was January of 1870. But we were kind of scratching the surface in our conversation about the color convention movement, but it's still timely to have a conversation about that. It's always a good time, being from Missouri, to talk about the state convention, but as you'll see, today is even more so a good day to talk about it. And so, what we want to know about the state convention and the Missouri State Convention in 1870 is that it was an education convention, and much like the conventions, the national conventions that we've referenced previously, you had Black men from all over the state of Missouri. You had Black men from St. Louis. You had Black men from Columbia, Black men from Kansas City, Black men from some of the rural areas that folks may not know much about. You have Black folks from down in Cape Girardeau, and just all over the state of Missouri. There were Black delegates, and there was also scores of communications sent by other delegates who couldn't make it because it was school. It was a school. It was an education. The purpose of the convention was to discuss education, and then you had delegates who could not attend because their school districts could not allow them to leave because school was in session at that time. So that was pretty awesome to kind of read that. But another important thing about it, so we got it. So the conventions. So with regard to our conversations, this is the first convention that we're discussing after the Civil War. So this is 1870. So this is the first convention that's part of our conversation after the Civil War. Much of this convention, again, is about education, and more specifically, this conversation is about the continued growth of, at that time, the Lincoln Institute. And so the Lincoln Institute, as we know now, is Lincoln University in Jeff City. And why that's important is because the Lincoln Institute was established by veterans of the 62nd and the 65th U.S. Color Corps in the Union Army. They were based in, so I think they were based somewhere in Texas, and And at the close of the war, those gentlemen pooled their money with a commitment to come back to Missouri and open an institution, and that institution was Lincoln. And so at the 1870 convention, the conversation was about the need for a normal school, and that normal school was, Lincoln. And so that's the setting. And you got any thoughts about that thus far?
I have several thoughts about it. I think that the foresight that they had was phenomenal, and we do not need to get away from it. They talked about the some of the students that were in rural areas that were going to have to go to school with white folks. And inside of these rural areas, they wanted a parallel track in these schools where we had Black teachers teaching these children. That stood out to me. And they had mixed ideas about how to deal with the city. But this notion that it was very, very important, one of the stalwarts of the convention was the importance of setting up educational institutions for Black teachers and the importance of it. And in addition to that, petitioning the legislatures for equal funding.
Mm-hmm.
And the mindset was very simple. It was very simple. They said either they'll give us the money or the next ones will. So the concept was, hey, if they don't, we'll get them out. Because you know why? We have 20,000 Black men that vote in this state. And we have gotten away from the desire to even ask for what's necessary. The fact of the matter is we don't even have the temerity to ask for equal foundational funding from the government. When I mean foundational as a baseline, as the comparable white institution. And I'm going to say it now, and I've said it before. Harris Stowe should be a destination location for our community 7 days a week. Harris Stowe, centrally located, incredible brain trust. There's an enormous amount of talent that's down there. We should have a Black think tank down there. We should have a Harris Stowe Press there that publishes Black authors. We should have a educational model down there that is replicated around the world. But we refuse to collectively go and petition and get the necessary resources for Harris Stowe. And we leave them to languish on their own. We've got to do better. We don't have to look far. We can go back to 1870 and get the model. We don't have to go anywhere. They were talking about the exact same things in 1870 as we're talking about now. And they incorporated if you summarized what they talked about, it was Black wellness through and through. And we're adamant that everyone get an education.
Absolutely. And again, so the issue is that they're in Jeff City. So Lincoln is in Jeff City, and the state capital is in Jeff City.
Yes, it is.
And so I think the first session that day was held somewhere in Jeff City, other than at Lincoln. But one of the first motions of the day was that we should move this convention to Lincoln.
And they adjourned.
And they adjourned, and they go to Lincoln Institute to carry the meeting. And then the other interesting thing in the notes is like they are writing and they're like literally doing real-time reporting on this. So they're passing motions in those first couple of days of the convention to engage, the governor and the relevant representatives. They're drafting documents, inviting them to join the proceedings. In the midst of the proceedings, those documents are being delivered to the governor's office, waiting on responses, and they're reporting the responses in the subsequent sessions.
Right. So in other words, real time, they went viral in real time back then.
They were viral real time. And so like they send a message to the governor, we want you here. I'll be there this afternoon. I mean, he writes back, I'll be there this afternoon. They report the communication at the top of the day, and then I think they report his response in the second session, and then in the evening session, I believe that the governor is there.
And this same model needs to be implemented again at Lincoln. There is no reason why Lincoln is, should not be a Star Wars. And at the same, what's so ironic is we are now dealing with a situation in Lincoln where it's no longer a historically Black college in terms of population, in terms of viability. And at the same time, at the helm of Lincoln, we have someone who's reported to believe, well, we know that he was under investigation for having a work environment that was hostile, that a brilliant young Black educator died by suicide.
Died by suicide, and now the National Alumni Association has a no confidence vote for the board of what is the board of directors or the board of curators. I don't know what they call it at Lincoln, but a vote of non-confidence for them and the report that they commissioned that ultimately cleared the president, who had been out
last week
on paid leave, and so he was just reinstalled in office or whatever, just returned to office either Monday or Tuesday of last week, and again, it's kind of odd because we have the same thing that's going on. So the same thing that has occurred with Lincoln is the same thing that has occurred at Tennessee State, right? Where due to the machinations of, some of the hostile entities, they implemented, enrollment formulas and solutions to flip Lincoln and TSU that they didn't implement to flip Mizzou or University of Tennessee,
or
right?
Harvard, or Yale, or.
And so, well, I mentioned those two in particular because they're the state, state schools, and are to a degree kind of going through the same thing. But like Lincoln has been upside down in this regard probably since the maybe latter 50s, early 60s. Surprisingly enough, I mean, many of us think that the white enrollment, that the size of the white enrollment is a relatively recent occurrence, but this has been the case in our lifetime. Is that there's been a significant, probably when I say significant, half or more of the student population in Lincoln has been white since the 60s. It's just that they ain't live on campus.
That is the major issue. They don't live on campus.
They don't live on campus. So when you go on campus, you see a historically Black college, but when you go to class, you see otherwise. And so, but it exists today because of the efforts. I mean, the reason that we have a Lincoln, back to the point, is that it is a foundational example of if we use the principles of Kwanzaa of Maulana Karanga, unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, creativity, and faith in the people. And that's what we see in the establishment of this institution in 1866. Again, these gentlemen, the 62nd and the 65th, vowing to establish this, and then knowing that in order for us to go forward, we have to have institutions of learning, but we need it all. We need, primary education, secondary education, and so forth. And so this is the conversation that we're having. Now, one other thing that I want to throw in real quick. One of the motions were, because and I think we talked about this last year around Juneteenth, is that in Missouri, we were one of those spaces that celebrated emancipation that first weekend of August. And we did so because it aligned with the emancipation. It aligned with British emancipation. And so the reasoning and the corollary for that, and it wasn't just in Missouri, but that's kind of how we got down. But the reason for that is that there was a recognition that slavery was brought to what became the United States by the British. And so so even though by the time that Britain emancipated, the United States had already, had its victory in the Revolutionary War. When Britain did it, that was the identifying piece at that time. So that's that had been, and there's still a significant amount of the state in central and southwestern, and probably south central and southeastern parts of Missouri, where they celebrate emancipation on that first weekend in August. Now, my family is from central Missouri, and we grew up celebrating homecoming that first weekend. And when I'm a little guy and on through my high school years, we just knew it as homecoming. But my dad, when I asked my dad, probably as an adult, why we celebrate why do we have a homecoming on on that first weekend, and he said that was Emancipation Day. And so I thought it might have been associated with because I think it was in August that General Fremont had initiated his emancipation order in the state of Missouri prior to Lincoln, and Lincoln made him rescind that order. And so I think that was in August, but that was like
Right.
August, so it's like at the end of August or something like that. And so that's what my initial thoughts of it were, but that's not the case. So it was really about, well, it probably could have been still some combination, but in the main, I think Missouri was one of the places in which it was attached to the British emancipation. And so anyway, back to this date, one of the things that was on the docket was, when do we celebrate emancipation? And so one of the things that's on the docket there, and we actually have had this conversation before as well, that I think in Missouri, we need to celebrate emancipation January 11th. because that's when slavery was abolished in the state of, in the state of Missouri. And so folks can, celebrate whatever they want to celebrate, but I think that's the day that we need to celebrate, particularly since there was still slavery after Juneteenth anyway. So to celebrate Juneteenth as if it was the absolute end is other than the truth. So, but that too was on the docket is really the point. That was on the docket in that January 1870 meeting is, when do we celebrate and recognize our emancipation? And so again, that's another example of Kujichagulia. That's another example of self-determination, that we determine, what we celebrate, how, when, and why.
That is correct. I want to go back and say by name, mention by name, the wonderful educator that died by suicide at Lincoln, since we did not mention her name. She was Antoinette Bonnie Candia Bailey, the vice president of student affairs at Lincoln. May you rest in peace. We owe you that and more. But at the same time, as it relates back to this convention, one other thing I found extremely fascinating were the financials that were listed, and how the actual commitment to education, the personal commitment to education, and the sacrifices, the financial sacrifices that were being made, and the accountability for the monies that were being made. And there was a collective determination as well as accountability that individuals were held to. But at the same time, I found it, I tend to find humor in everything, in a number of things. But the report on those attending the convention without credentials that had been found. There's nothing new under the sun. We show up to frat conventions, sorority conventions to this day and don't register. But we want to take in the information, and that's good and bad. So, I mean, these issues that we had, that I just found it fascinating that they reported on those things in such a concise way.
And very, very, very cute, very, very, very,
very astute,
very detailed, manner in which they did it. But they had means of addressing those things too.
Yes, they did. But they addressed it in the meeting in real time and dealt with it. So it's just a fascinating. There is so much to. There's such an education in our history, and there's such because I didn't know anything about this until you brought this up. There's just such almost I'm not going to say the conviction that they had, but there is so much assurance in what has been done, because the things that there are a number of things that we feel intuitively that have been done and addressed. And it's almost epigenetically that some of these things have been passed down to us, but we have become numb to them. We try to become numb to them. But the foundation has been set, and that country preacher that says, the way's already been established, is correct in more than 15 or 20 ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, like when we look at, as you just noted, you just noted about the delegates who weren't registered, and the difference, the difference then versus now is that we have people intentionally going to conventions today we go with no intention on being delegates, no intention on attending the business meetings, no intention. We go to kick it. We had, in most cases, we have, a year or 2 years to plan and to attend, because there's steady communications, there's email and there's text and there's all of this communication. Primary reason why people are showing up at these conventions, Missouri is no different than any other conventions that we've covered, is that people find out when they find out. But once they find out, they want to be there. And sometimes it's quicker for them to get there than it is to send what's necessary, to be able to send the credential. Or maybe there are even some circumstances of which both are cost prohibitive, the registration and the mailing or sending of the registration. And you need that money to show up. You need that money to kind of get there and show up, and then you'll fight that battle when you get there. But that's what you see happening. And so that part is kind of is reflected in the meeting minutes, and that you can see throughout the course of this meeting as well as other meetings where how do they handle that? Democratically. They vote. They vote to add folks who showed up that were not registered previously. Right.
Absolutely. And
they add them to, so now they become a part of the record, because they're not just there. And I'm not saying they didn't have any, because they speak to that. I'm not saying that there was no, revelry. They ain't had no good time, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that's not why folks were showing up. They weren't showing up for, like, this wasn't CBC, right? This wasn't the Congressional Black Caucus.
No,
that's not what this was.
No,
folks was coming to Jeff City to kick it. This was folks coming to Jeff City to take care of this business. Now, that being said, even when we get to the part about their entertainment in the evening, we see cooperative work in economics, right? So we see they're talking about, the sisters and, and the other brothers who, are the vendors, in and near Jeff City, who are entertainers, who are, who cook, who got wares, that whole nine. And so, that too has to be a model for what we do. I mean, again, the fact that, I'm clear. We know the time frame we're talking, but we don't have to move away from this model. There's no reason why we're not using our HBCUs to host conferences. There's
no rational reason.
No rational reason. And so, so one of the people that you see throughout that document, because part of what was going on was that they were building out the board. One of the people that you see throughout that document is Reverend Moses Dixon. Moses Dixon he was born in Cincinnati. He moved to St. Louis, and he's important for a lot of different reasons. In the 1840s, he established an organization. He built out an organization of 40,000 folks with the intent on waging rebellion against the U.S. to free enslaved Africans. And so what that organization started to do was it became entrenched in the Underground Railroad. So they were all over the place. And so by the time we get to the Civil War, that group, most of that group, they enlist in the Union Army and they fight They fight with the Union Army. I'd be surprised if none of those guys, some of those guys had to be in that first Kansas Infantry, which is actually that first Kansas Volunteer Infantry is actually the first Black unit or what have you to see it. So it wasn't the folks in glory. They were the first enlisted Black regiment to fight. The 54th. The 54th is the first enlisted regiment to see action in the Civil War, but actually the Kansas First Volunteer, they're the first Black regiment to see, combat in the Civil War. And that too was in Missouri. That those fights were along the border of Missouri, and they were in Missouri. And so, but anyway, Moses Dixon, he raised this unit of 40,000 Black men and women to do this work. And so their work was to overthrow the slave caste system. And so again, so they did that through the Underground Railroad, and then ultimately they joined and fought the fight. Moses Dixon became, he's Prince Hall Mason, and he became a Grand Master of the state of Missouri. And he turned coming out of the war, he turned his interest to education, and he was also instrumental, along with the gentleman from the 62nd and the 65th, in establishing Lincoln Institute. And so at this meeting, at this convention, he's added to the board of directors for Lincoln. And all that to say, this is a reason why, Prince Hall in the state of Missouri, they shouldn't be traveling all over the state of Missouri trying to figure out where to meet. They should be meeting at Lincoln. They should have, council of deliberation at Lincoln. They should have grand session at Lincoln. And if they don't have it at Lincoln, they should have it at Harris Stowe. They could alternate. So at this point, they're now, making, so I can think over the past 2, maybe 3 years, they've been making pretty sizable annual donation to Harris Stowe. I don't know if they alternate, but I know they've made some sizable donations to Harris Stowe. But that is another part of this piece that we've lost, and that when we're coming together, part of our coming together has to be about whatever the agenda is at hand. And again, in this case, we're talking about education, but it also has to be about the core. It's and as much as it is about the collective work and responsibility, it's also about the cooperative economics. And so we should be meeting where we have resources that, that we can help, that we can share in, that we should meet in places where we can help Black businesses thrive. At a bare minimum, we should be meeting in places that are not hostile, right? So even if there's not if for some reason we feel like we have to meet somewhere where there is not a thriving, Black convention and restaurant and leisure industry, then at least that place needs to be other than hostile. But we don't do that well, right? We go spend our money anywhere. And so we have become, at this point, as careless and reckless with our money as we are with our labor. Those things don't work out well for us. And so, but those are the things that are on the table, in 1870. We are in 1870. What we're talking about, we're talking about all of that. We're talking about education. We're talking about labor, and we're talking about ownership. Right. We're talking about all those things. We're talking about the development of the people. I think there's also, recognition in there. I think there's an acknowledgement of the election of Hiram Revels in the minutes, right? So we're not simply consumed with state politics. We're in tune with national politics, and we're not just consumed with state or national politics. We're consumed with state and national Black politics, and how those things, how we have to be moving in both spaces. We have to have a Black politics, because that out of that is where our Black agenda comes from. And once again, this reaffirms that our Black agenda hasn't changed. Our Black agenda is what our Black agenda is. We're concerned about voting. We're concerned about housing. Other thing that comes up in this is what? 40 acres and a mule, right? They are encouraging folks that they can move to Kirkwood, they can move to Kansas City, they can move down around Branson, because there's land for free, or, remarkable terms. Like, I think like that land in Kirkwood, you could get in 2 payments. The first payment was 5 years. You had 5 years to generate some revenue on your property or otherwise. That first payment was due in 5 years. And this wasn't no interest accruing payment. That first payment was due in 5 years. And then I forget what it said about when the balance was due. The properties, I think, in around Kansas City and down in Southwest Missouri, I think those lots were free, right? And so we had that. All of this was discussed at this meeting, and in 1870. Those things that make us a viable entity in the state and therefore the nation were discussed in 1870. At this state convention that is called primarily to kind of strengthen and solidify Lincoln Institute.
Yes, and it's as relevant today as it was back then. Another individual I'd like to highlight that was mentioned was Mr. Tandy. The gentleman that the Tandy Rec Center in St. Louis is named after, who was a civil rights icon. Some of the reports on him state he was a lawyer, some of them do not. But one thing is for sure is that he was a civil rights icon, and he fought for justice and for jobs for Black folks till the day he died. He was born in Kentucky, and moved to St. Louis from Kentucky. And he was born a freeman in Kentucky because his grandparents bought the freedom for his family, his mother and father. So and everyone in their immediate family. But he moved here and was an advocate for emancipating slaves. And after emancipation, he was an individual that fought for civil rights, economic, educational, and health care for all of us. So, I mean, these are individuals whose names we see. I last saw Mr. Tandy's name a couple of weeks ago, but oftentimes we do not make the connection to why this building is named after him and how
Who
much.
is this building named after, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And we allow them, we allow the the organizers or the stewards of those buildings to allow those buildings to become into some disrepair. But I can say that Jason Tatum, a couple of years ago, financed and refurbished the gym floor. It's beautiful in there now. Brand new floor in there, and other amenities. So Mr. Tandy's his legacy continues in that vein, but we've just got to do a much better job of identifying and summoning the acts that he had, but identifying and stating who he is to make it very, very plain. He needs to be, we should be able to discuss who he is in an elevator pitch. We should be able to know those stalwarts in our community. And
Similarly, we should like with Father Dixon, with Mose Dixon.
absolutely,
There's Mose Dixon or Father Dixon Cemetery is over in Crestwood,
right.
and it had gotten to a place in disrepair, and again, finally the Grand Lodge of Missouri stepped in and went over and had very concerted effort to clean and maintain it, and has been doing so since. There's a lodge named after Moses Dixon, 187, and these people mean something. And I think, like, in terms of our institutions, so before there was a convention, before there was a national Negro or a national colored convention, before there was a state convention, there was Prince Hall Masonry. And after Prince Hall Masonry came the AME Church. And so much of this organizing that we've done historically and nationally is a function of those two organizations. But we don't really treat those two organizations as foundational to our activism in the United States. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Some of that is the fault of those two organizations, and some of that is the fault of just people, of Black folks otherwise, who rely upon the enemy to tell us, who and where, we should, we should give honor and recognition and praise. When in reality, if we do our work, then we see, there's, when we talk about Richard Allen, we don't talk about Richard Allen as a political organizer, right? We talk about Richard Allen. We do talk about him because of the church, but most folks, well, I ain't gonna say most, but there's a lot of folks who talk about him and don't necessarily talk about him, relative to the AME Church. They just talk about him relative to the church, period. But that is this is where we find really the, might not be the entire genesis, the sole genesis of our, of our activism, but a huge part of our collective activism is born out of Prince Hall Masonry and the AME Church. That's just a historic fact, and we need to act as such. And it's no different in the state of Missouri. No different than the state of Missouri. And so, but that was really the important things. Those are the important things about that 1870 meeting, is that it's about education and labor, and and honoring our freedom, stepping into our freedom, engaging the government, engaging the state government, acknowledging, what's going on the national level. Another thing that's important is that this is happening in the midst of the meeting actually happens a month before the 15th Amendment is ratified. And then so like today is, so on this day, March 30th in 1870, the announcement of the ratification of the 15th Amendment was made. And so this was what they were doing in that time. And so like these are like literal real time battles. And so like one of the interesting things, so U.S. Grant gave a speech on this day, and and he references, the interesting thing about that is he references Taney's
ruling and Dred Scott.
Yeah. So when this is just an excerpt that he says relative to the importance of the moment. So this is U.S. Grant, a measure which makes at once 4 million people voters who were heretofore declared by the highest tribunal in the land not citizens of the United States nor eligible to become so, with the assertion that at the time that, quote, at the time of the Declaration of Independence, the opinion was fixed and universal in the civilized portion of the white race, regarded as an axiom in morals as well as in politics, that Black men had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, unquote, is indeed a measure of grander importance than any other one aspect of the kind from this foundation of our free government to the present day. And so when recognizing the importance of the ratification and implementation of the 15th Amendment, U.S. Grant references the state of Missouri in the Dred Scott case. We are like literally ground zero.
And continue to be ground zero.
And continue to be. And so when we get to Mike Brown, that's not some one-off, right? This is who we are. I mean, there's a whole the History Museum downtown under the arch or at the arch. They have a whole program centered around Missouri First. Talking about the legislations that the legal precedents have been shaped and established in St. Louis or in the state at a broader level that have gone on to impact everything else. And so, but this is why we have to know. This is why we have to know. But this is what that was March 30th. That piece there was March 30th, 1870. So that's just 2 months after the convention, right? And so what else happens as a result of the convention? Well, as a result of the convention, Lincoln starts to in 1870, it starts to get its appropriations from the state. That's a function of the convention. That's also a function of adding the governor to the board. Right. And so these are the things that have to happen. So in 1871, it moved to the current site. In 1877, college level curriculum. In 1879, Lincoln formally became a Missouri public institution. In 1880, Inman E. Page became Lincoln's first actual president. And in 1890, it was after the Morrill Act, which establishes the land grant colleges. Lincoln becomes a land grant institution and is offering classes in not just education, which is really what the purpose of the normal school was when we're talking about the convention, but now they're offering agriculture, mechanics, and teaching. But these things come out of the fight that start in 1866 with the 62nd, the 65th, Moses Dickinson, and Tandy and these other gentlemen who fought the fight in order to establish an institution of higher education in the state of Missouri. And that's why the state convention of 70 is important.
Among a million other reasons. Thank you so much for your continued scholarship and deep thought and deep love and care for our community, Dr. Alexander. One of the things, as I mentioned earlier, just as I think Harris Stowe should be a situs for critical Black thought, obviously Lincoln and Lincoln should have its own university press, its own Black think tank. It should be a place that we all visit annually for some sort of reason, as you also amplified. But we are looking at a dichotomy where there's been an attack on Black students, Black faculty, Black employees, Blackness around the world, the new buzzword. It seems that the mainstream loves three-letter idioms. It was CRT last election cycle. Now it's DEI. And they even have come up with a moniker that these less than mediocre idiots are spewing. And they have now tagged DEI as didn't earn it. Who in the hell do you think you are? Who do you think you are?
It is so crazy. It's like
it's
I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they was talking about somewhere in the Fox stratosphere that they blamed DEI
on Baltimore.
On Baltimore, right? So the tragedy happens in Baltimore because of DEI. Right. But this raises a great point at this time of the year to kind of bridges to last week's conversation.
Let's go right into it. Yes, because also it solves a problem that we have at Lincoln and Harris Stowe too, if we implement it right. Go right ahead, Doc.
Yeah, and it's like so the author. So this is a brother. He's writing. His brother Ricky Jones. He's writing in the USA Today, and his question is, is this the time? Is this the time, for black athletes to stand up? And I mean, and the fact of the matter is, it's always the time. This DEI just becomes the most recent thing for us. But so this goes back again to what we were just talking about. This goes back to unity, self-determination, cooperative work and economics, creativity, faith. It's all of these things, in that we give our labor and financial resources to entities that have no vested interest in our well-being, only that which we can yield on their behalf. And March Madness is one of the greatest examples of this. You probably don't see as many Black faces no other time in the year than you do during March Madness for hours on end, right? And so we have states, Like, so at what point? So we talk so crazy about DeSantis. At what point do Black parents stop allowing their sons and daughters to go to the flagship institutions, and or the private institution for that matter, in Florida? When do we stop sending our kids to the University of Florida? When do we stop sending our kids to Florida State? When do we stop sending our kids to Miami, to the University of Miami? Why aren't we pooling our resources? Why aren't we? And again, as constituted, and just by sheer numbers, we know that the HBCUs could not accommodate all of the kids that want to go to school, but at least go to school in a place that is other than openly and outwardly hostile to your very existence.
Where your existence, is suffering an existential threat.
Correct. So why go to school in Florida, Alabama,
Alabama,
Virginia, these states who have open, Kentucky, these states that are at war with the whole concept of DEI. And so to your point, it's always a something. There's affirmative action, then it's what's the legal piece? What's the legal piece that people keep trying to make? You just
CRT,
affirmative action, CRT, and now DEI. All of these things speak to some forms of equity, some forms of strategy, things of that nature, about how we are able to, stake our rightful claim and receive our just due, right? No more, no less. But we undermine, our fight because we give so freely, again, our resources and our labor to the enemy. And we know what the numbers are, so even for those folks who are talking about, what is this? You can go to school. You stand a far better chance of going to school if you just did your work than if you're gonna go as an athlete. 3%. And so like we talk about 3%, like that 2 to 3% for D1, that's what it is at each level. So only 6% of kids, of high school athletes, are gonna play college football. And it breaks out, college sports, period. And that breaks out to like 2% at D1, 2% at D2, and 2% at D3. So contrary to popular belief, you're probably an elite athlete if you play any of those levels. We think you're an elite athlete if you just play D1. You're an elite athlete. You're better than most people that you come in contact with if you play at either one of those, either one of those levels. You better than 90% of the folks you're gonna come in contact with if you play.
You're going into YMCA in the world and whole court.
Yes. And so, but that's a small number across each division. And so you stand a much better chance of getting to college and completing college and becoming a professional in something by just pursuing your academic, your academics in a responsible manner, because it's a very small percentage of kids who are actually getting scholarships to go to D1 schools, and you get smaller scholarships at D2 schools, and you don't get any athletic scholarship at D3 school. And so it's a small pool of money. And the other trick that you got to know is, given the NIL, that pool is shrinking too, because that too was a trick. So now the institutions ain't even, some of the institutions, the D1 institutions, might not really be on the hook for much of anything, because they got X number of, of course, their whole team ain't going to have an NIL, but they have a few athletes that have an NIL. Your larger, institutions that, because we just think about, those things that we see on, the national endorsements, but just think about, these kids in some of these smaller markets who, probably dominate, the local scene in that regard. And so that takes away a significant amount of the responsibility of the university, towards those kids. Now, it's great for those kids, but what about the kid who doesn't have an NIL deal? Right. And so these are the things that we have to continue to kind of pay attention to. But here we are, March Madness, excited, doing backflips, and we're not considering the total ramifications. As we discussed last week, they didn't come up with a new metrics to kind of manage the whole conversation about graduation rates when they start talking about, the student success rate, or the graduation success rate or whatever, which isn't even really graduation. It's being in good standing at the time that you leave an institution. And so, they're literally playing the shell game with our education. We have to really effort not to be complicit in that. And part of the way we do that is we have to continue to have these conversations. But again, I just find it interesting that, those things that were important, this becomes another example, let me say that, those things that were important in 1870 are the same things that are important today. How do we fund our institutions? How do we educate our young people? How do we fund and sustain our institutions? And how do we educate and develop our young folks so they can, have quality of life and actively participate in the system, politically and economically and otherwise, for our, not just our individual betterment, but for our collective betterment, because this is a constant battle. And we got to stop thinking that every time we see the first Black whatever, that we've arrived. Because every time that happens, we relax. Oh, we're making progress. What progress? It's like it's we look at how much money Black folks are making now, which I'm sure is more than what we've ever made before, but the wealth gap is getting larger. And so if we're going to be happy about our financial gains, then those financial gains have to simply, they got to, not simply, but really be about what we do with those gains relative to what we've been able to do before. And are we doing more? Because for me, it feels like we always did more with less. I'm always kind of concerned with what we're really doing now. Right.
I think
and so
I think
that's the battle.
Yeah, that is a battle. But I think if we are looking for athletes to get out in front of any movement, we are in trouble.
And that's what the brother concludes in the argument. It's like, are they going to stand up? And he's like,
No,
no.
I can tell you.
And that should not be, where we're seeking leadership. And I don't necessarily think, and even in the context of this article, I don't necessarily think it's the response of the athlete. I think it's the collective response of our community, of our parents, of our whatever the indigenous leadership is. That's where the level of responsibility is. Go ahead, brother. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the curation is too strong for all of the above. The curation begins the actual courting of the child, and the vast majority of these athletes are second and third generation athletes. You have to, I mean, to compete at the level, that 6% that you talked, there has to be some genetic brilliance in your veins. Now, you couple that with a look at me environment with social media. You couple that with being, the requirements in order to be brilliant, and an application, which is what a sport is. It is the application of math, science, elements, your opponents. It is an application of self-control, of bodily awareness. All of these things come into play. That takes a lot. We underemphasize the individual that's able to sit on the bench, let alone play, because of what you have to, defeating oneself is enough for us to study athletes forever. Defeating the fears that you have, defeating the shortcomings that you have, and outworking those. In order to do that, oftentimes you can't show brilliance in another area in academician. So this is who you become. You become a basketball player, football player, a golfer, or whatnot, and you do enough to do well academically, because you have ingrained yourself into your art. So the brilliant ones, they're separated from the community in sixth grade. After they're separated, they're told they're the best, they're doing this, this, this. They surround themselves with individuals from, they go that are not from our community, because the wealth becomes the play then. You're now at a hotel magnate's house, and his house looks like nothing that you've ever seen, and you begin to value that person and those that look like that person, and you value us less and less and less. And so your entire world turns to that. And the further up the ladder you go, the more entrenched you become in that system, to the extent where you think DEI is not affecting you. I'll give you a harsh reality and example. The individual going around attacking DEI programs around the country, Ed Bloom, a disgruntled individual that lost an election in Texas, because Black folks didn't, were unmoved by him. He's a Jewish guy. How many Jewish agents are in the NBA? How many Jewish agents are in the football or in the NFL? How many of those agents share the exact same mosque or religious facility with Ed Bloom? How many athletes have said, hey, you tell your boy to chill out, else we're going to find somebody else to represent us? How many? It hadn't happened, I can guarantee you. So, I mean, this notion that they're going to help, I don't think they can. There are some that are conscious. There are some that know where they are. But by and large, I think that is a group that we have to compartmentalize. It's almost, yeah, we have to compartmentalize them. And we need to do a better job of identifying them for who they are. They're almost enemies to our
well, they don't start there, but based on your, how you lay it out, the sequence of things, they get there. Ultimately, they start to have contempt for the folks who need them most, right? And so they start, because they still got to do something at tax time, right? And so then you see their philanthropic efforts are very, very, imbalanced, right?
And they're condescending. They're condescending. I mean, you know, you're gonna put $1 million into a housing situation, man, go sit down somewhere. Really. You know, I mean, it's like I went to a party, an organization telling me we raised $25,000 for scholarships. I was like, well, why am I here?
It is,
I
you
mean,
know,
you know, you know, it is at some point, at sometimes you can almost say, you know, I wonder, are we a serious race?
well, that's kind of what I'm getting at. And so the issue is, you know, are these structured endeavors, right? And so this becomes another example of where, you know, we have to, like, we literally have to put the two together. Like, we have to reach out to to the to the young men and the young women, and you know, we have to reach out to the families and have these conversations. What's the brother that gave the money to Morehouse to clear the debt for the young men in
Robert,
2019?
Robert Johnson.
Is
Is
it
it?
Johnson?
I think it's Robert. What is it?
So so that anyway, find his name. His name escapes me right now.
yeah,
Uh, but anyway, last week, the Morehouse National Alumni Association
Smith. It's Robert Smith.
hosted a conversation
It's
between Robert Smith
yeah.
and um, and Jalen Brown. And
Let me
um,
let me say this. Jalen Brown's an exception.
no,
He's
no, I get that.
yeah,
But the whole point is that it's happening,
yes.
and he's not the only one who's in this space with people like Robert Smith. That Robert Smith and other folks, you know, that you know have the mindset and the resources of Robert Smith are being very intentional about having these conversations. And so, um, but they don't have to just happen at Morehouse. They can happen. Neither of those gentlemen are Morehouse alum, right? And so that you know is an example of Morehouse showing some leadership in this space, and you know, and leveraging the brand to pull those, you know, to pull those gentlemen together. And so, but this could happen, you know, Harris Stowe could do it, right? Harris Stowe could get Dave Stewart um
Jason
and
Tatum.
and Jason Tatum and do the
Yeah.
same thing, right? And so these this stuff has to happen. And so it's not as though any of these guys are necessarily too far gone, but if we don't reach to them, you know, and you know, and have these conversations. I mean, it is wonderful that these guys, you know, build gyms and have like the narrative can't be your travel team, right? So that's you know kind of the problem is that you know
Which, you know, which is almost like, you know, the indentured servant going out and recruiting more indentured servants.
and it would be okay if your travel team was comprised of kids who wouldn't be able to play otherwise, because as we discussed last week, that's where this thing is going,
Right, but
right?
not
And
it.
so, but that's not it, right? And so we essentially have these guys establishing these teams, and then they literally cherry pick and they create that next, you know, that next uh, generation of disinterested young men and young women. And so, but there is a model, there is a pattern we have to follow. We have to follow that, and we have to be the interrupters. These aren't decisions that you know that kids are making in isolation. Parents are making these decisions, and so you know we got to do this. This is ground. This is grassroots work that we have to do, and so you know again this is the continuity of the fight. This is the consistency of the fight, And so when we go back to 1830, we were trying to figure out how are we safe, because that's why that initial Richard Allen called that initial peace, because they ran the folks out of Cincinnati, Ohio, right?
Right.
And so we're worried about our safety. We're worried about citizenship. We're still worried about citizenship today. Why? Because this dude ain't extended the Voting Rights Act, right? You know, the same dude who made sure that Haitians at the border were returned to Haiti, right? This same dude who funds the extermination and genocide of Palestinians. You know, that guy gotta go. Now, we can be strategic about when he goes, because X number of folks are too scared to get rid of him because they don't want this other guy to get in. Okay, well, that's fine. So you got to figure out how you manage these things. Now, and we got to stop thinking about like so that lesser of two evils. That's more of a situational strategy. That can't be a perpetual strategy. So we can't accept Joe Biden so as not to have to deal with Donald Trump and not have a plan subsequent. Because that's where we find ourselves. That's where we find ourselves at now. Because when he got elected, we was like, well, we got to get him instead of Trump, and here we are now, about to elect him again. When the strategy should have been, okay, he's a stopgap measure. What do we? And we know that he's a flawed candidate, because everything he has done historically has not been in the interest of Black folks. So if we're going to pick him as a stopgap measure, we got to be ready for 2024. And here we are at 2024, not ready. We're stuck with him for another. And so, but these are the lessons of history that we have to learn.
Right. I want to go back to the athletic piece for 1 second. There are a number of exceptions to the rule. Chris Webber, Jalen Rose. There are a number of exceptions, but too many times we are finding that these individuals do not come back home until their playing careers are over. And I don't know if it's an unrealistic expectation to have them attempt to do these things while they're playing, because that is such a grind, and I understand that. But I think athletes need to understand the way they are perceived in general. I think that they operate with a pair of rose shaded glasses on. If you the treatment that and I've seen it at the highest level. If you will recall, when Michael Jordan was a part owner for the Washington Bullets or Wizards at that time, I'm not sure, I don't remember if it was the Bullets or the Wizards. He went back to play, and obviously when you go back to play, you have to give your ownership up. And he played a few years, increased the value of that team. He retired, went to the owner to get his ownership piece back, and he was told to summarily kick rocks. That window has closed for you here, young man. He ultimately was successful in attaining the team. But if you fast forward to 2024, former athlete A-Rod has been up to get this Minnesota team, and he's increased the value of the team by pure or just mere appearances and other things. And he had a ownership agreement in place, apparently, for reasons that are known by some, explained by none. The owner decides, you know what, A-Rod? Nah, I'm not gonna sell to you. Think I'm gonna keep my thing. Folks, you're playing a game with some folks that'll never respect you in the same vein they are. And I'm hearing more and more players talk about, I want to own a team. Okay, yeah, good luck with that. Mike didn't own the team because he played. Mike owned the team because of the issues that he was able to accomplish outside of the basketball court. So I mean, they just have this false narrative that they've been sold, and they oftentimes don't understand that if a man can pay you $200 million, I mean, give you a $200 million contract, how much money do you think he has? And how much money do you think you have to give out multiple $200 million contracts? So, I mean, there's just a general level of education that we have to get to them. And that, and I don't think they have a very good understanding for the way that they are perceived. So, I mean, it's just, and we continue to get examples.
And I agree with that, but I think that's a community responsibility, and to the degree that it's not happening, I believe it's a community fault. And so we don't control our greatest asset. I mean, that's been that's kind of our continuous narrative, right?
I'm going to quote one of your frat brothers that I have grown to appreciate, that works very, 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 very closely with the athletes. I won't give him up, but he works very closely with. It's not a whole lot you can tell a 21-year-old that's getting $3 million a year. It's not.
Well, that's why you got to tell him before he did that. And that's the point. And so
that goes, Doc. That is great in theory. And
no, it's not great in theory. That's why
great.
Jaylen Brown is who Jaylen Brown is, because he didn't come from nowhere.
He didn't. Okay, but
and so and these guys aren't. And so we had this conversation. These guys aren't coming from nowhere. These guys aren't coming from dire straits. And so the issue is to work harder on the front end, in these spaces, not with the guy once he's arrived, but with all of the guys and girls who are in the pool. So that as they are going through, they are getting this, they're steadily getting this developmental process that better, buttresses the effects of the realities of, a white-facing, capitalistic society. And so that becomes...
Yeah, we're going to have some very, very intentional program, actually not relationships with that. And because I've been around.
Because because that's not just sports. That's across the board.
It's across the board.
Yeah, it's so for me, it's the same thing as, looking, like I know when I'm talking to a Black psychologist, right? Some of us, we get our degree and we practice Western psychology. I don't practice Western psychology. I practice Black psychology. Now, I'm not saying that all the Western psychology is a waste. I'm saying I use it as necessary. There are some points of it that are helpful for me as an organizing principle to help the person that I'm talking to help them, to help me help them, right? So that's how I use it. But frame of reference, like what is healthy, what's ground zero for Black folks, that's a Black thing, right? And so, but I know when folks don't know anything about Black psychology or the origins thereof, right? And so, but that too, that starts. I mean, and again, it's across disciplines. That starts at a young age in terms of what is the young person seeing. This starts before you start making vocational decisions.
You have
this is a cultural piece. This is about how, that collective work and responsibility. If you grow up in that, you're gonna be that.
That's correct. That is correct. But not enough of us are being entrenched in that.
That's the challenge. Right.
It's hard to duplicate those environments, man. So yeah, I agree with you. We can't stop trying. I don't want to, sound like a individual that says this is an impossibility. But we are going to have to work hard, because fame is a monster, man. I mean, very few of us are equipped to deal with that. And the thing that the underlining mindset that these kids are coming up with is that, if you've never had a $500 million, how can you tell me what to do? And,
But
that is,
again, you and I know Black millionaires that are not famous.
yeah, we know more that are not famous than that are those that are famous.
Absolutely.
And
And
so,
so we need for them, to be doing differently. We need for people of means, period. You ain't gotta be no millionaire. And when I say means, you ain't got to have no bunch of money. I'm saying when I say means, I mean of value. Folks who have something to bring to the table that benefits the masses.
that's correct.
And we got to do the work. We keep identifying the obvious, but in identifying the obvious, we see kind of the distortion in our strategy. Because when we identify the obvious, like it's at some point we have to know my favorite phrase: we are the cavalry.
That's correct.
They're not coming for us. Now, they
No,
certainly have some resources that are
they're coming to prey on us, not for us.
yes, they absolutely have some resources that are due us. Like, we are entitled to the local, state, and federal tax dollars that we pay. We are entitled to those things. So we absolutely have to do what's necessary to get the access to those things to benefit our communities. And then in addition to that, we got to throw our talents and resources into the mix in order for this thing to flip. And when I say flip, again, I ain't trying to flip the United States government. I'm trying to flip the condition of the masses for Black folks. That's kind of what we're talking about. And so we did it in 1870. We could do it now.
And that is the bottom line. Doc, I think that's the way to summate the show. We did it in 1870. We can do it now. We thank you all for participating in this Resurrection Weekend. And, there are no mistakes. There's a reason why everything happened on this day in 1870. There's a reason why this is Resurrection Weekend, because there are some parts of our community that may feel dormant or dead that need to rise. And this is the time. There's no better time than now. Doc, you have anything else you want to add as we close out?
You close it out, brother.
All right. Well, if it's the Lord's will, we'll see you all next week. Thanks for listening.